Hey everyone and welcome back to a new video. Today I want to delve into the preview trailer for the upcoming and highly anticipated Silent King model, which Games Workshop unveiled at the very end of the 40k 9th edition preview event a few weeks ago. Now, since that trailer was unveiled, we did get a much clearer picture of the model from afar, so I'm going to be referring to that as we go through the video, picking out parts of the model that really intrigue me and sharing my thoughts on what some of these different elements might mean. So let's get stuck in. Interestingly, the video starts by panning over some of the inner workings of Zarek's throne, specifically these huge power cables. Now, it goes without saying that clearly there is a huge amount of energy being channeled into this device, and in my last video I talked about that being a key part of the Necron's technology, immense power harnessed through carefully layered protocols and controls. Whatever this throne's capabilities on the battlefield, it's fair to say that they're going to be nothing short of devastating. But more than anything else, what strikes me with this image, and more so with the later photo, is how none of the integral machinery of the model is covered. Given the powers being harnessed, you may expect that these components would be covered up and shielded away from enemy weapons fire, certainly with more protection than these two shields are offering. And yet they're not. The Silent King and his followers are quite confident that whatever they face, it's not going to pose any real threat to the machine at all, and that really tells us a lot about this device. It's as much a presentation of confidence as it is a weapon of war, and we'll come back to that towards the end of the video. We then move on to view the throne from its right hand side, seeing both one of the shield devices and one of the Silent King's aides, who I'm pretty confident are the new Necron Triarchs. My guess is that the shields will offer bonuses based on where they are placed and how they intervene on line of sight, which is a cool concept that we haven't really seen before, at least not that I can remember. But I'm drawn to the fact that these ancient devices are still clearly weathered and possibly even damaged looking at the cracks we see on them, given how these fissures bisect some of the Necron inscriptions and are somewhat too irregularly shaped to be deliberate Necron designs. I think it's clear that they weren't built this way. Personally, I think this hints towards another aspect of the Silent King and perhaps the Triarch Council in general. They are immensely powerful, but they are also millions of years old, and time is clearly having an effect on them. As we're seeing with some of the newer models too, it seems that the Necrons are perhaps not as immortal as they believe they are. If their bodies are becoming more fallible, then what does that say about their minds and their culture? For me, this is given more weight when we see members of the Triarch accompanying Zarek, and specifically how frail and elderly their bodies appear. They have the signature Necron hunch that prevails through much of their artwork, but it seems far more exaggerated here. The elongated chins and the bent legs all serve to emphasise the stoop, and it gives a rather sage-like presentation to both. They clearly embody a lot of wisdom and influence at the head of the Necron culture, but wisdom only really comes with age and all the compromises that come with it. I'll come back to this idea later. We next get a sweeping shot of the Silent King's cloak and the rather unusual design it has. Perhaps unsurprisingly for Necrons, it seems to be made of some sort of metal, but one that is reforming and rebuilding itself as it flows around the steps of the throne. Now, in addition to being a pretty cool concept, this cloak, like any bit of clothing, also helps to glean more of the Silent King's character. If you think back to films like Terminator 2, the concept of liquid metal was used to present the T-1000 as an equally invulnerable and inconsistent threat, which could adapt to any situation as it sought to eliminate its enemies. There's a hint of that here, with the Silent King able to bend this immensely strong material to his will, and even doing so simply for cosmetic effect. But unlike the T-1000, the metal isn't purely fluid, it's remoulded as these cubes, which give a sense of underlying logic and structure to the process. Together, I think these illustrations capture the Necrons perfectly, an almost invulnerable threat able to reshape and rebuild itself in the face of any enemy, but harnessed through very precise and structured protocols. It may be just a coincidence, but the fact the Silent King not only reinforces this core aspect of the Necrons, but literally adorns himself in it, presents him somewhat as the epitome of what Necrons are and the realisation of what they can be under his rule, and it's just really cool to see this flowing off him so easily. But in this frame we also see the steps leading up to the Silent King, which are probably better seen in the later photo. Now, first and foremost, it presents a clear sense of hierarchy. Zarek stands high above the battlefield and the concerns of lower races, and the staircase also leads solely to him, and that's an image we've seen on a number of characters. Again, I draw a comparison to Catacross from Age of Sigmar's Ossiarch Bone Reapers, because Games Workshop really does seem to like these diorama models for its more regal characters. As with the Silent King, Catacross has a single staircase coming up to him, and I think this has a similar effect with both models. Not only is our eye drawn up to both, making it a great visual device, but it also illustrates where the power and authority of the model lies, with each able to freely descend to the battlefield as and when they wish. Moving on, we get a glimpse of the Silent King's staff, and what probably struck a lot of us is the fact that another piece of Blackstone is appearing here. If you remember, the new Illumina Xeris model also has a piece of Blackstone attached to his shoulder. Now, the Necrons have historically used Blackstone to ward off the effects of the warp, and it's believed that they now want to use it to help close the Great Rift prior to their conquering of the galaxy. I'll be honest, I'm not sure what function it might have here, maybe helping to nullify psychic and demonic attacks, but it certainly strengthens the links between Zarek and Xeris, which were already alluded to in one of the recent Pariah short stories. Personally, I'm rather more intrigued by the symbol beneath it. At first, I wasn't sure if this was something denoting a dynasty or a title, but it certainly mimics honorific Necron text, which makes me think that this is something proclaiming the Silent King status. In particular, I think both the circle and the line curving above it are particularly interesting, and I'll come back to those in just a moment. What's not too clear from the image though, and maybe it's because of the focus, is whether the script is weathered. Going back to my thoughts on the first trailer, the Silent King has taken great steps to conceal his identity, and the fact that the text seems far softer than the inscription surrounding it makes me wonder if that's evidence of that. Alternatively, it also points back to my comments on the shield. The icon seems weathered, overtly so compared to the rest of the model, and maybe this is a slightly more obvious gesture to the fact that Zarek is millions of years old, and his dynasty and rule have been battered by the sands of time, again bringing all sorts of possible connotations with it. But lastly on this, I think there's something significant about the fact that the Blackstone sits above the honorific text. It's almost as if it has more prominence as a symbol of office, and to see it now appear on two major characters makes me wonder if Blackstone might become a more significant part of Necron hierarchy, and to such an extent that all previous honours and titles cease to have the same meaning as they did before. Given its role in erasing the taint of the warp from the galaxy and making way for a new Necron ascendancy, that wouldn't surprise me. Now, I want to return to that circle and curved line symbol as we explore this next frame, in which we see something very similar to the Ankh of the Triarch. Now, it's not quite the same, and that in itself is very significant, because the Necron Codex makes it very clear that despite all of the cosmetic differences between the dynasties, the symbol of the Triarch is never deviated from. Yet here it is, we see a curved break between the core and the upper part. To me, this could only be allowed for members of the Triarch Council itself, and in my mind confirms that these two aides to the Silent King are in fact the newly formed Triarch Council. And that has potentially huge ramifications, not only for this model but Necron lore overall, because it means we're not only seeing the Silent King's return, but the return of the entire council that rules over all Necrons and all dynasties. This is like the Emperor and the High Council of Terror coming back all at once. And we get a closer look at one of the Triarch members with this nice close-up shot. Again, we can make out that variation to the Ankh of the Triarch on the pulpit, but we can also see a variation of this circle and curved line emblem appearing on the adornments hanging around the Triarch's shoulders. I won't dwell on this, but I think there's clearly a distinction between the members of the Triarch who have the curved line under the circle and the Silent King who has the curved line above the circle, and I would expect that we're going to see these appearing a lot more as the Necron race unifies behind the word of the Silent King, conveyed through his Triarchs. As I mentioned earlier, both Triarchs also have rather elongated features, and these mimic the false beards that ancient Egyptians would wear. They were worn by the social elite and would be used to help them more closely resemble some of the ancient gods. It was as much a class statement as it was a fashion one. With that in mind, I do look at these rather long faces and see them very much as a caste statement in Necron society, one that's even more apparent when we glimpse at the features of the Silent King himself. And yet, as I've mentioned earlier, those features do clearly show signs of age, with that rather prominent dent in the Triarch skull. I won't labour the point, but it's interesting to note that despite all of their attention to grandeur and presentation, which we'll come back to when we take a closer look at the Khatan, they still seem content or compelled to wear their scars. And always one to tease rather than outright reveal, Games Workshop then offers us the Silent King's outstretched arm, which is quite a passive stance when you come to think about it. Unlike the new Cryptet looking figure in the bottom left of the army image, he's not directing troops or gesturing towards the enemy nor preparing to strike. Rather, the pose in my eyes looks rather welcoming. When we think about it, offering one's hand is generally seen as a sign of respect and invitation in many cultures, and I wonder if that applies here. Is it a simple invitation for Necron warriors to rise up once again, or perhaps an invitation for their enemies to see the reality of his cause? Either way, it's a very confident stance and one that gestures towards a lot of what we don't yet know about the Silent King's character. A number of people have also pointed out the tattoo inscription on the arm, and while I can't really tell what it is, it might be a version of the emblem that we see on his left leg later on. I'm sure we'll find out in time. What I'm really pleased with though is that Games Workshop have kept clues like this a mystery and weaved them quietly into reveals without spoiling the surprise, particularly for us Necron fans. But in the essence of time, I'm going to move more swiftly towards the Catan. We get a glimpse of how the Triarch measure up to the Silent King, something that was made very apparent in the later image, and I'm glad to see that he really is as much of a giant as the initial trailer suggested. I personally thought it was just a symbolic image, but it makes sense given that he's going to be facing some of the fiercest enemies in the galaxy, and he needs to do so eye to eye really. Again, we see this honorific script on his leg, and without repeating my earlier points, I just want to reflect on the 3 circles towards the bottom. I'm sure we'll find out what all of this means in the new Necron Codex, but, and without creating a conspiracy theory, I really do get intrigued when I see symbols like this that mimic Nurgle's own symbol, also denoted with 3 circles. For Nurgle, this represents the cycle of death, decay and rebirth, and while I'm not suggesting that the Silent King is a secret Nurgle agent, although that would be one heck of a plot twist, it's interesting to think that that symbol clearly has meaning for another race that also knows all too well about the cycle of life, death and rebirth. One to think about perhaps. And just before we look at the Catan, we get a clearer view of the second Triarch model, and I feel a lot of what I've said about the other one applies here. However, I like that while the models have been arranged symmetrically, helping to frame the Silent King rather well, the design team have also given them some sense of personality by offering 2 different types of head. What this means is that the Triarch aren't simply seen as the Silent King's faceless bodyguards, but rather individuals with very significant roles in Necron society, and we see a careful balance illustrated with their models. They're clearly individualistic personalities, but ones that are literally and figuratively positioned around the Silent King, something we can see being reflected more broadly with the entire Necron race. And finally, let's take a look at what seems to be the power source for the Silent King's death throne, a living Catan. We get a better sense of it in the later image, but what strikes me first is how incomplete it is. Unlike the Catan contained within the Tesseract vaults, this one appears dismembered, and while I don't think the Silent King has literally cut its arms and legs off, it does give a sense of a mighty being brought low, a mere shadow or fragment of its former glory, which is actually what it is when it comes down to it. We see this intense anguish on its face, the first time I've seen a Catan looking like this, and it's an expression that reminds me of Commander Keyes from the first Halo game when he was possessed by the Flood. The hollow eyes, mouth and body not only give a rather ghoulish appearance, but as with Keyes, present the Catan as a husk, a shell devoid of the life and soul that once sustained it. Without making too fine a point on it, I'm rather captivated by the fact that hovering above Zarek is this fractured god crying out for a salvation that will never come, a silent scream above a silent king. But let's try and answer the big question, who is this Catan? Well, personally, I'm pretty confident it's Caligura. For those who don't know, Caligura was once a horrific engine of destruction. However, he was captured by the Silent King and transformed into a Catan shard, which Zarek forbade any other Necrons to use. It seems now we know what purpose he serves, and I sense that the central gem in his chest is the single Catan shard, allowing the full power of the Star God to be channeled into the Silent King's throne. In many ways, this is a phenomenal revelation. A star god, one of the most powerful entities in the galaxy, condemned to be nothing more than a battery. But developing that further, I want to close by talking about how the Catan is presented, because spectacle is a key aspect of this model. It's something to be seen by the enemy as much as it is designed to overcome them. And when looking at the later image, we see how Caligura is hung overhead, presented even to the followers and enemies of the Silent King. Like the other components of the machine, he's not hidden away like the other Catan are in Tesseract vaults, which is surprising given that we know how much damage they can cause if their containment devices become compromised. But not in this case. Again, shields aside, he's simply presented out in the open. The Silent King wants people to know what he's done. And more so, the containment device is shaped very much like his staff, which I think hints at his dynastic heritage. It's very similar to the Saltec dynasty, but I personally don't think he's from that. The Silent King's return gives us a great opportunity to go beyond traditional dynasties, or maybe introduce a new one altogether. But either way, my point is that the containment device surrounding the Catan seems to have a symbolic meaning, and it's one that the Silent King presents like a standard bearer would, proclaiming his superiority to everyone before him. It's an incredible power flex, and one that I think works wonders for showing the Silent King's true nature, silent and unimposing, but with a mind and will able to bring even the gods to heel for his own purposes. So that's my thoughts on the Silent King model and what we've seen so far. Even talking for as long as this, I feel I'm only scratching the surface, and I can't wait to see the full model when it comes out. But what have you made of the Silent King so far, and is it a model you'll be picking up when it's finally released? I certainly will, but I've got literally no idea how I'm going to store it. I think I need to get it its own case, and to be honest, that's probably how Zarek would want it when I come to think about it. But as always, I want to thank you very much for watching this video. Please do consider liking it and subscribing to the channel if you enjoyed it, and I do hope you'll join me for the next one. But until then, take care.